Hi there, welcome back. I want to make a couple corrections in this video and clarifications. To begin, I had stated incorrectly in the last video, or perhaps a couple videos ago, that I was given an eviction notice in July. It was actually June. It was the end of June, not the end of July. My eviction was for August 1st, and that was from my first eviction from Dave in my downstairs apartment, which I had been in for about 10 years. I had said that the upstairs apartment had 3 units. That was, I misspoke, it's 3 bedrooms. The building itself was 2 units, comprised of the downstairs, which was where I lived for those many years, and then the upstairs. Those were both essentially pretty much identical units. Was originally a family home, which the previous landlord, Myra, had lived in as a child, and then eventually owned. And she owned it with her sister. I want to mention that upon returning back from my parents' house, I had notified one of my roommates that I was probably going to move in with my parents, and that they would, to get the ball rolling, trying to find another roommate. When I had abruptly arrived back after that incident with my parents, they had not yet found a roommate. So that's why I was able to stay there. I mean, I was evicted, the day after or so by Dave when he came around, when he came to the apartment. But had that not happened, I would have been able to live there because my roommates had not locked down a replacement for me. Now, while upstairs in that second floor, when all of these all the construction was going on, and we were dealing with all of these chemical vapors, the hardwood flooring was not just refinished on the first floor. Also, the foyer, which was down on the first floor landing, and the stairs that went up to the second floor, and the landing there on the second floor, were also refinished. The reason I'm mentioning that is because the vapors just surrounded us. There was just no escape. It was, not only coming up from the second floor, but it was all the way up through the stairwell and right up to our entrance door. We were just locked in with this, with these toxic vapors. Now, when I had mentioned to Dave about ventilating the place, originally, he had always balked at that. He had always refused to do it. His initial, the reason why was, as always, it was due to not wanting to spend the money. Now, we were approaching, it was colder. It was about September at that point, maybe late August, September. And the weather wasn't cold, really, but it was getting cooler. And he had cited the heating costs. Didn't want to ventilate because introducing obviously outside air would cool the temperature inside, and then he'd have to warm it up, and that would cost money. In my opinion, totally inexcusable, but that was his reasoning. I want to also mention that I had while I was at my parents' house, I had called in I'd ordered a fuel delivery, an oil delivery, and a significant portion of that delivery was still in the oil tank. There was a couple $100 worth of oil sitting in that tank for the first floor unit when I was evicted. So even though I think that he should have been fully willing to spend whatever costs, whatever it would have cost heating the place because of the offset of losing the heat by ventilating the place. He would have been able to use the oil that I had purchased, and I never got a reimbursement for that. That oil sat there. That became his oil. That, a couple $100 worth of oil was his now. Now, while all of this, while I was trying to get them him to ventilate the apartment, it was really he and that other guy who had been living in that first floor unit only for a period of time. Once they started doing the floors, he no longer, I don't know where he lived, but once they started doing that with all the toxic stuff, he was out of there and was living somewhere else. But after I had been evicted from the second floor, after I guess bothering him so much about ventilating the place, shortly after, I had come home from lunch. I was back at work at the Hardwoods place, and I was in very poor health. That's sort of aside from the point that I'm about to make here. I came home and I saw that guy outside. He was doing some painting on the exterior. And so I approached him before I left, and he and I had been on, when I say good terms, what I mean is it was civil. Our interactions were civil. I wanted to make sure that if he was going to be a fixture there, that there was as little tension as possible. I approached him and I simply asked him, I prefaced it with, I had been dealing with a lot of chemical vapors. Before he leaves, could he open up the windows? And I actually just asked him to open up the windows. I didn't even ask him to put a fan in because it was clear there was no fan. He didn't have access. I mean, I didn't expect him to go buy a fan, but at least just opening the windows up there would have done something. It wouldn't have trapped those chemicals in there for them to seep up to the apartment, at least not in the concentration that they had been. He responded very aggressively, and he told me to leave. He just said, "Get out of here." And he kept yelling at me, "Get out of here." And I was really, at that point, I was at the end. I was completely at the end of my rope, and I tried to, summon up as much restraint as I could, and just simply try to communicate to him. I'm not asking you to do a big favor for me. Just leave some windows open before you leave. That's it. And he continued to tell me to he said, "Get out of here. Get out of here." And I'd been evicted, but I still had a month to live there. I paid my rent. That was my home still. It angered me considerably, and I began yelling at him. Now, what I didn't mention was that he had a friend over, someone. He was on a bike. I think I'd seen this guy around, and they must have known each other because he was there in the lawn, and he began videotaping me. And the interaction became more and more tense, and I began yelling at him in my front yard for everyone to see. I had lost it. I couldn't, the amount of injustice that I felt that this guy who I was simply just asking what I thought was a very reasonable request to leave the windows open because of a serious issue, I thought was entirely justified, and I approached it initially in a civilized manner. And I was met with, it almost seemed like he had been coached into by Dave to adapt his behavior with me to something more aggressive. That's an assumption I'm making. I have no, but his behavior was markedly more different in that interaction, and considering the circumstances that I was in, I got very angry, and I was yelling at him, and I probably appeared to be crazy to anyone else who didn't understand the context of it, and they were videotaping it. I didn't realize until toward the end. This interaction went on for a couple minutes anyway. He videotaped it, and later on that, Dave was there all the time. He was there all the time anyway. Before all this, he kicked me out of the downstairs apartment. But he was there later on that day, and he blamed me for the interaction. He said, what was he say? I'd never heard this expression before. He said, "Yeah, you both had your dander up," something like that. I'd never heard that expression before. I don't like it. And essentially, he placed the blame equally on both of us. It just really, the whole thing. It's just, it's very upsetting. Okay. So, oh no, I've lost my place. I'm sorry. Also, the issue of being kept up at night by my upstairs neighbor. What should have happened is, after having tried to resolve that by interacting with my neighbor and finding that he wasn't willing to take the proper steps in order to fix that problem, I should have, as a tenant, been able to, at that point, notify the property manager, in this case, Dave. And he should have stepped in and solved it. For instance, I've been a property manager. Well, I no longer am, but I was a property manager for quite some time. My tenants were fantastic. I had a great rapport with all of them, always. I never had a problem. And I attribute that to being honest with them, respecting them, their space and their privacy, and being an adequately effective communicator. And that avoids all kinds of issues. And we had a fantastic relationship, all of my tenants and I. Had I been approached by one of my tenants about a problem just like this, I would have, first of all, made sure that they had, the tenant knew, that the problem tenant had known about this issue and was in fact unwilling to take the proper steps in order to fix it. And I would have asked the important questions to determine what exactly was causing this. In this case, it was the fact that he was on a second shift schedule and that he did not need to be on second shift. He could in fact be on first shift. He chose second shift. This was not something that was a requirement of his job, and he was not in a circumstance that was outside of his control. He absolutely could have chosen the second shift or third shift or whatever, but in this case, first shift would have been the proper shift to choose, considering that he's inhabiting a space with other people that are all on the same schedule, except he's on that different one, an opposing schedule. I would have said, if that's the case and you've chosen second shift and that's in order for you to partake in recreational activities, you need to get on a first shift schedule, or stop those recreational activities during those times. In this case, I think that considering that he was not going to stop gaming, the best alternative would be for him to switch to first shift, and he'd have to game with a different community of people. I really think that that's why he chose second shift. I think he preferred, he was a night owl probably, and I understand that. I've always been, a night owl. I enjoy being up at night. But if my doing that was significantly harming someone else, and it wasn't a necessity, I would alter my behavior. Anyway, I would have approached that without hesitation. with that, it would have been my duty, and I would have been completely willing to do it, and I would have received they either would have complied or they would have had to leave. And I would have been fair about it, and I would have been diplomatic about it, but I would have been firm and said, you don't need to be doing these things, and you're disrupting someone's sleep, and sleep is absolutely crucial. It's as important as eating and breathing, and it's an essential part of human, bodily function. And to wrap this up, when I moved upstairs, that neighbor who had been causing those noise problems, he was unwilling to communicate with his roommate who had been facilitating my move up there. And he was also unwilling to communicate with me. He just moved out once I got up there. And the roommate that I had been living with previously on the first floor, who was kicked out along with me, he just moved up into the second floor apartment. He had been house sitting, and so he had an easy out, and was able to go from that first floor apartment, I'm pretty sure, to the place he was house sitting. But since that wasn't a permanent solution, he just came back, and he lived upstairs in one of the in one of the available bedrooms, because now I had moved up there in the free bedroom, in the available bedroom, and then that problem roommate, the one that was causing the noise issues, had moved out, leaving yet another additional room. So he moved into the spare room. I wanted to make those clarifications. It lasted longer, of course, than I wanted it to, but it was important to, I think, tie up some questions that I may have left by being unclear about some things. I'll stop this here, and then I'll get back into progressing with that story, which is close to completion. Thank you.